I can tell already that this is going to be a great group. In fact, I'm feeling so comfortable that I'm going to start off right away by revealing a little truth about me. I'm going to tell you something that not many people know. I'm going to tell you my favorite city. And you're not going to tell anybody, right? It is Dallas, Texas. Now, if you know many people from California, you know not many people from California have a favorite city of Dallas, Texas. And even fewer of them will admit it. But there's a simple reason why I'm so fond of Dallas, and I'm going to show it to you right now. It's because of this building. This is the Renaissance Tower. For many years, that was the tallest building in Dallas, but that's not why I'm so fond of Dallas. It's because this building, for many years, was the headquarters of the Blockbuster Corporation, the world's largest video store chain. Now, more importantly, a meeting took place here in the year 2000 that fundamentally changed my entire trajectory as an entrepreneur and changed the entire trajectory of a little startup that I was running called Netflix. Now, in the year 2000, Netflix is a very, very different company than the one you know today. To start, we were very small. We had less than 100 employees. We were on track, I think, to do maybe $3 million in sales that year. But unfortunately, we were also on track to lose nearly $50 million that year. Now, you don't need to be a math wizard to know that if you're making $3 million and losing $50 million, it's not a very sustainable business. So, we decided to do the thing that prudent entrepreneurs do. We decided to pursue strategic alternatives, which of course is code for how do we sell this thing. Now, in the year 2000, the obvious strategic alternative was Blockbuster. But Blockbuster was in a very different place than us. We had 100 employees. Blockbuster had 60,000 employees. They had 9,000 stores. We were on track to do $3 million. Blockbuster was on track to do $6 billion. So we were nothing to them. So when we called them, when we wrote them, when we emailed them, trying to get a meeting, nothing. Until a few months later, out of the blue, Blockbuster calls and says, "We will see you tomorrow morning in Dallas." And we're kind of concerned, how are we going to get from where we are to Dallas overnight? And so we did the prudent thing that a company which is $50 million in the hole would do, is we leased a corporate jet, and we flew to Dallas. And we took a cab, went up to the 26th, 27th floor of this building, into a conference room the size of this thing. And in come the Blockbuster folks, and we make our pitch. We will run the online business, they'll run the stores, we'll find the synergies, and we'll all live happily ever after. And they asked a few questions in the right places, until they asked the most important question of all: how much should we pay for you? And my business partner, Ray Fis, got his courage together and said, $50 million? And he said,
"Oh!"
So the challenge here is that I have a very hard time not waving my arms around, so I'm going to try my best to hold still. Anyway, so we went to Blockbuster. We were going to sell Netflix. We asked them for $50 million. You know what they did? They laughed at us. They laughed at the hubris that a little company with 100 employees would want $50 million. Well, it was a long, quiet ride back to the plane and a long flight back home to California But I remember sitting on that plane with my head down, just thinking, oh, now we're going to have to kick their ass. And we did. It took us 10 years, but eventually we did drive Blockbuster into bankruptcy. Now, I'm not telling that story to gloat much. I tell that story because in some ways it's an inspiring story. It's a story of how a handful of people with no experience in the video industry could take down a $6 billion corporation with 60,000 employees. But it's a different story, isn't it, if you are the $6 billion corporation? Because what it says then is that you never know where the next threat's going to come from. But they may not look anything like you. And they're not going to attack you where you're strong. They're going to attack you in ways that you're weak, where you are unable or unwilling to defend yourself. What the real lesson is of Netflix versus Blockbuster is that if you want to avoid being disrupted, you have to disrupt yourself. Now, Netflix was certainly a disruptive story, but Netflix was just one of 7 startups that I've had a hand in starting. And since leaving Netflix, wow, more than 12 years ago, I've had a chance to work with scores of other early stage companies, with hundreds, if not thousands of early stage entrepreneurs. I've worked with small companies and big companies. And I've come to realize that there are some simple truths about why it's possible for small companies to take down big ones. Simple truths that allow big companies to defend themselves against small ones. But what I've also learned is that there's a lot of myths. For example, you do not need to be in Silicon Valley. I travel all over the world working with companies, and I've seen amazing innovation in places like Argentina, in Chile, in Mexico, in small towns, in big cities, in Asia, in Europe. It is happening every place. You do not need to have special skills. You don't need a computer science degree. You don't need to have business experts. One of my favorite entrepreneurs dropped out of college. He drove an ambulance in Los Angeles. He fought forest fires in Montana and then started his own company. Another played in a ska band. He has dreadlocks down to here. And he started a music streaming service, which he has sold. Another of my favorite entrepreneurs is 17 years old. Anybody can do this. And in fact, you don't even need to be particularly smart. Some of the best innovators I know were not the A students or the B students, they were even the C students. And anybody who has kids going through the schools knows it's so competitive now that by the time kids graduate, they've had all the risk-taking squeezed right out of them. So what do you need? And it turns out, I think it's surprisingly simple. I think you really just need 2 things. First, you do need that tolerance for risk. And I don't mean individual tolerance. I mean a corporate, cultural tolerance for risk. And I don't mean scary, dangerous risk. I mean the type of risk-taking that comes from starting down a path, but not knowing where it's going to lead. Making a decision with almost no information to make it on. But you can't just be making risks randomly. You need some guidance, some North Star. You need an idea. And as I'll share with you today, you don't just need one idea, you're going to need hundreds of ideas. But they don't need to be big ideas. Mark Zuckerberg just wanted to meet girls, and that ended up becoming Facebook. My son was only 8 years old when he started his first company, when he realized the candy bar that he could buy for 10 cents at school, at the grocery store,
could be sold the next day at school for $1. Candy arbitrage. It doesn't need to be a new idea. Amazon was just a bookstore. Now, we've been selling books since they invented the printing press. But think of the innovation that's come out of this little company. They've been renting cars since they invented the wheel. But think of the innovation we're seeing now in transportation with Uber and Lyft, Get-Around and relay rides, self-driving cars. It doesn't need to be a complicated idea. The Post-it note is a piece of paper. But this little piece of paper sells more than $1 billion a year. And I'll go out on a limb and I'll say, it doesn't even need to be a good idea. Because what is a good idea? By way of example, when I told my wife the idea for what eventually became Netflix, she thought it was the stupidest thing she'd ever heard. But we've all had that experience, right? Where you wake up and you have this great idea and you come rushing into the kitchen and you tell your spouse, or you come to work and you tell your employees, or you tell your board, or you tell your boss, and then what do they say? That will never work. And then they're very helpful and they tell you all the reasons it's so stupid. Thank you very much. Why is it so hard to tell good ideas from bad ideas? Well, to help us understand that, I want to introduce you to somebody. It's a gentleman named William Goldman. There he is. Now, if you don't recognize William Goldman, I am not surprised. William Goldman's a Hollywood guy. He's a writer. People of my generation know that he wrote a movie called Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Younger folks may know him for writing Princess Bride. He's written 24, 25 movies. He has 2 Academy Awards. But ironically, William Goldman is most famous for writing 3 words. And what he wrote was this: nobody knows anything. Nobody knows anything. Now, he was talking about Hollywood, and in particular, how no one knows how well a movie's going to do until after it's done it. That you can have the best director, you can have A-list actors, you can have a great script and a big budget and end up with a complete flop. But at the same time, you can have a first-time director, you can have amateur actors, you can have no script at all and end up with a movie like Blair Witch Project, which cost $35,000 to make and has grossed $250 million. Nobody knows anything. True in Hollywood, but true any place new ideas are being tried out. I mentioned earlier that Netflix is just one of 7 now startups that I've been involved with. Now, one of the companies on this list has a market cap of $150 billion. One is a new unicorn. One's gone out of business, 2 have gone public, one's mediocre, a bunch of it sold. But if you had asked me on day 1 which would be which, I promise you that I, nor anybody else, could have told you, because truly, nobody knows anything. And the reason I'm reinforcing nobody knows anything is because you can't get stuck on your idea. If nobody knows anything, there's only one thing to do: is you have to take that risk and you have to do something. You've got to test something. You've got to sell something. You've got to make something. You're going to learn more in 1 hour of doing it than you will in a week, in a month of thinking about it, or of doing a PowerPoint about it. And don't even get me started on business plans. We have an expression that says no business plan ever survives a collision with a real customer. So you have to take those ideas and get them out in the real world right away. But it's got to start with the idea. And that, of course, presupposes you can come up with an idea. So let's talk for a minute about where these ideas come from. Now, you all are professionals. You know there's some classic methods for finding ideas. There's new technologies. My most recent startup was a big data startup. You can look at current trends. You can look at business models and applying new business models to old problems. But I'm going to tell you a much simpler way to come up with ideas that every single person in this room can use today to come up with an idea which might transform your business, which any of your employees can use to transform their business. And it's simple. You just have to train yourself to look for pain. You've got to see the world as an imperfect place. You've got to ask yourself, what's wrong? But not with the world. What's wrong with the things you know well? With your business, your department, your customers? What are you bumping into every day? Now, I don't want this to be abstract, so I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to use a job that I had. And I'm going to use a job that I had a long time ago when I was in university, and I was a house painter. Now, this was almost 40 years ago, and the world was a different spot. The technology was primitive. There was no Wi-Fi. There was no streaming video. There were no personal computers. None of that existed. And back then, when you went to buy paint, it came in a container that looked like this. I know, it's primitive. So, nonetheless, I'm now going to jump forward to just a few months ago, and I was painting my daughter's bedroom. And it's now a very different world. When I go get the paint, I'm driving in a self-driving car. I do have Wi-Fi. In fact, I've got a browser right in the dashboard. I've got a computer on my wrist. It's amazing. So it was interesting that when I went to the store now, 40 years later, to buy paint, it now comes in a container that looks like this one. No change. 40 years. Now, it's pretty lame, actually, because when you think about the experience, you have to open the can of paint. And luckily, there's a special tool you use to open a can of paint, right? It's called a screwdriver. It's okay. I do own a screwdriver, so I can pry off the top of my paint, and I can go put it aside where I won't step in it. And now I have to stir the paint. And luckily, there's another specialized tool to stir paint, and it's called a stick. You can see it up there. But it's okay, the stick works pretty well for stirring the paint. But now I have to pour the paint. And you can see it has an easy pour spout. It's okay though, so I take my paint and I pour it. This is going to be hard. I pour it into my tray. And that works okay until I tip the can back up again, and two things happen. One, unless I'm very careful, paint spills down the side of the can, or it can get on my hands or the floor or on the walls. But worse, a little bit of the paint fills up that little lip that the lid sits in. More on that later. So I won't go into how difficult it is to paint, how you have to put down cloth, you have to put tape on your windows, you've got to carve out so you don't get any paint in your trim. When you're done, you've got to try and pull this roller off without getting your hands dirty, and then you've got to pour your leftover paint back in the can. And that works okay. But now I've got to close the can. And it's perfectly ironic that if you needed a screwdriver to open the can, of course, you need a hammer to close the can. But I have a hammer, so I put the lid back on, and I hit the lid a few times with the hammer, and I had forgotten about that paint that was filling up the little lip, which of course sprays all over my legs and all over the floor. Oh, what a mess. Now, as I told that story, what I hope was happening is you were thinking to yourself, well, that's silly. Why don't they sell paint? I don't know, in the kind of container that milk comes in. Or even better, the type of container that laundry detergent comes in. Or why don't they have a lid you can buy afterwards with a spout built in? Why isn't there a stirring mechanism already in the can? Why don't they? Or why couldn't I? Or why isn't there? I mean, hopefully you found these ideas just popping in your head without even trying. And this was for something that happened to me. Just imagine how powerful it can be when you train yourself to look at things that are happening to you. Because you see, ideas do not spring out of thin air in some eureka moment. The idea for Netflix did not come from some moment of anguish over a late fee on a movie. We were looking for that idea for a long time. And that idea was not easy to find. In fact, we didn't even find it in a video store. We came up with that idea while we were in a carpool. Now this story goes back even further, more than 20 years ago, when two friends and I had started a small software company. We had about 9 employees, and about 6 months in, something great happened. We were acquired, and it was a great thing. Our stock options were worth something, our investors made money, we all went to work for this big company. The other 2 great things was this big company was founded by a gentleman named Ray Fis. And even more interestingly, it turned out that Reed lived in the same town that I lived in. So Reed and I began driving to work together. And we did that for about another 6 months. And then lightning struck again. Our big company was acquired by an even bigger company. And once again, it was a great outcome. The investors made money. Our stock options were worth even more. But the best thing is that I got fired. But I didn't get fired in that bad walk of shame kind of way. I was fired in that wonderful Silicon Valley golden handcuffs way, where they sit you down and explain how it's going to work. And as I listened, I went, wait a minute. It's going to take 6 months for this merger to take place. Yes. And you need me to come to work every day, and I get to stay in my office with my fast internet connection. Yes. And you're going to keep paying me and vesting my stock. Yes. But I don't have anything to do? Well, no. I said, well, sign me up for that job. So for 6 months, I got to come to work every day, and I said, I'm going to work on my next startup. Now, Ray Fis was in the same boat. And he was also losing his job, but he didn't want to start another company. He wanted to go off and become an educational philanthropist, and he decided that he wanted to keep his hand in this startup business. So we decided we'd come up with an idea together, that he would fund it, that I would set it up and run it, and away we'd go. But we needed that idea. And here's how it worked. Every morning, we'd get in the car, and we'd drive up and over the Santa Cruz Mountains to our office in Sunnyvale, California. And on the way, we'd brainstorm ideas. And we'd look at new business models and current trends and new technologies and brainstorm ideas. And I'd take them, I'd research them. At the end of the day, I'd get back in the car and I would tell Reed everything I learned on the ride back up and over the mountains. And we did this with hundreds of ideas. And we learned something interesting, because some of the ideas were good, some were bad, and we realized that the half-life of an idea was very short, only 24 hours. And what that meant is that on Monday morning, you started off with 16 ideas. That just one day later, probably 8 of them were gone. The next day, you were down to 4. One day later, only 2. And by the end of the week, only 1 of those original ideas was still around. Now, one of the ideas we looked at was video rental by mail. But back then, videos came on VHS cassettes. Big, heavy, fragile, and it didn't take much research to realize it's not going to work. But then, just a month later, we heard about a new technology called a DVD, and we had an idea. So we went down to Santa Cruz where we lived. We went to a record store and bought a used music CD. We went next door and bought a little envelope, put the CD in the envelope, and then mailed it to Reed's house in Santa Cruz. And the next day when he picked me up, he didn't even say anything. He just held up an unbroken CD that had gotten to his house in less than 24 hours for the price of a stamp. And that's when we realized this might change some things. Then my job changed. Now I was really trying to validate this idea. I did tons of research. How many DVD players were sold? How many DVDs were there? How many people would I need? How much money? How much time? But I couldn't learn the one thing I needed to learn, which is, would it work? Every time I asked a question, there was no answer. So we had to do that one thing that every innovator has to do, which is make a decision based on incomplete or inconclusive, or even worse, contradictory information. We had to just take that leap and do something and try it. And so Reed wrote us a big check. I hired a dozen employees. We got a small office. We spent 6 months building a simple e-commerce website. And on April 14th, 1998, we launched a company called Netflix. Now, back then, Netflix was very different than the one that you know today here in Mexico. For one, it was DVD only, no streaming. If you wanted a movie, we mailed it to you. And there was not much innovation. There was due dates. There was late fees. And we didn't just rent movies, we sold them. In fact, we sold so many movies that by the end of that first month in business, we had good news and bad news. And the good news was we had $100,000 in sales. The bad news was almost all of it was from selling DVDs. And that was bad because it was a commodity business. And we knew that if we were going to succeed, we had to pick something that was differentiated. But it took a lot of courage to say, we're going to walk away from 99% of our revenue and focus everything on rental. But of course, you know, that is what we did. One day, we just turned a switch, shut down selling DVDs entirely, and bet everything on renting movies. Now, I got to point out to you that when in one day you walk away from 99% of your revenue, it definitely has a way of focusing you. And we were desperate. We were going to try everything, and we had lots of ideas. But I'm a perfectionist. So as we tested these ideas, they were works of art. They had custom photography. We'd argue over every single word of copy. We'd test every link. We'd stress test the site. It would take us a month. And then it would fail. And we'd say, oh, we just wasted a month. Ugh. Okay, faster. We'll do a test in 2 weeks. And it would fail. Faster. We do a test in a week. And then a test every other day. And then a test every day. And then multiple tests a day. Now, as you can imagine, when you're testing that quickly, it's getting sloppy. We're using images of the wrong thing. They have watermarks in them. There's misspellings. We have broken links. The site is crashing. But what was amazing is that it didn't make a difference. We realized that if it was a bad idea, even a perfect test didn't make it a good idea. But if it was a good idea, then even this terrible implementation, it immediately shone forth. People rushed to do it. They'd reboot the site. They'd call us. And then we knew what to fix. And the insight was that it was not about having good ideas. It was about building a system and a culture and a process for trying lots of bad ideas. And that's what startups are great at, and that's what every company has to get good at. Since you never know which idea is going to work, you've got to build a core competency in trying lots of things. And it's simple. You just have to learn how to fake it. You have to learn how to test things without actually doing them. Doing something that I call validation hacking. Now, validation hacking is the art of testing something without actually doing it. And I'll give you a very quick example. A company that I worked with in San Francisco called Easy Fridge, he had an idea that occurred to him when he was one late night at a party that ran out of alcohol. And his idea was an app that he hit the button, it knew where the open liquor store was, they deliver the alcohol. Now, he didn't want to hire an engineer, didn't want to raise money. His idea for testing this idea without doing it was simple. He printed a business card that just said, "Need beer? Call me." And he went on Friday and Saturday nights and stood outside apartment buildings and handed people his card. And when the phone rang, he got on his bicycle, drove, bought the alcohol, went back to the apartment, went up, delivered the beer, and you know what he found out? Bad idea. But he figured that out with nothing more than time and a business card. And doing that, he collided his idea with real customers, which gave him the insight for what eventually became his real business. Now, Netflix was, of course, doing lots of validation hacking, but you do eventually run out of time and run out of money, and we were running out of both. But we had a few ideas. For one, we had a warehouse full of DVDs. We said, why are we storing the DVDs here in our warehouse? Let's store them at the customers' houses. Let's let them keep the DVDs as long as they want, and when they're done, they can just send it back. No due dates, no late fees. And when they send the movie back, wouldn't it be great if we knew what to send them next? Have them build us a list. We called that the queue. And rather than charge them each time, let's just have a monthly subscription. Now, amazingly enough, when we took all three of these things, combined them together and tested it, it worked. A year and a half in, hundreds of failed experiments later, we finally had found something that worked. And it changed it all. Customers began coming to us. They told their friends. They didn't cancel. They were willing to pay for the service. And it marked the moment when we stopped being a startup and became a real company. But if you had asked me on day one, on April 14th, 1998, what would the business model look like that eventually worked for you? I never could have told you it looked like this. In fact, if you had let me cheat and said, here's three different choices, I probably still wouldn't pick the right one. Because remember, nobody knows anything. The only way to figure these things out was to try them. On April 14th, 1998, I had no idea. But what I was thinking on April 14th, 1998 was something very different. I was worrying, is this thing going to work? Now, I remember we had a little conference room, and we had set it up with a computer on a table at one end, and we rigged it up that a bell would ring whenever an order came in. And at this side of the room, we had a table with champagne to toast our success when we launched. And on 9 o'clock in the morning, our CTO hit a few buttons, and we were live. And we all stood around looking, and then, ding, our first order. And we cheered, and we began opening up the champagne, and all of a sudden, ding, ding, 2 more orders, and we cheered again, and we were toasting each other, and then ding, 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 4. we were up to 7. And we were so excited, and we were all laughing and telling stories, and then we noticed it was kind of quiet. There hadn't been any orders in a while. We plugged in, and it turns out we had crashed all of our servers in the first 15 minutes of being in business. So rather than spending that day toasting my success with champagne, I was pushing a shopping cart while we loaded up all the pieces we'd need to limp our servers through that first day. But we did it, and we ended day 1 with 100 orders. And I couldn't believe it. I never imagined that. But then, once we figured out the no due dates, no late fees, 3 years later, we had 150,000 subscribers. Again, unbelievable. But today, we have well more than 100 million subscribers. Countries all over the planet. We make our own TV shows, our own movies. I never could have dreamed that Netflix would end up like that. It's astounding, and people stop me. They say, "Mark, you must be so proud of what Netflix has accomplished and what you did," and I'm never really sure what to be proud of. Is it that I was smart? Well, no. I mean, as I hope you heard, most of my ideas are bad ones. Is it maybe that I'm persistent? All right, well, I'll acknowledge I'm pretty persistent. You have to be if most of your tests fail. But what I'm really most proud about is something else. I'm an optimist. And not a glass half full optimist. I'm a glasses overflowing optimist. I am just a believer in things. I do a little angel investing, and the truth is I'm a terrible angel investor. And I shouldn't be. I can see the flaws. But I get so excited that pretty soon I've grabbed that whiteboard marker and I'm on the whiteboard saying, we can make this work. The problem is, I like every idea that I hear. And that's not a good formula for an angel investor. So, when I told you before that there was 2 things that were the special ingredients that separated the companies that were able to fight off people versus not, and the 2 ingredients that small companies did, I wasn't telling you the whole story, there's 3. Yes, you do need that tolerance for risk. If you're scared to start, you'll never finish. And yes, you need to have an idea, and in fact, as I've explained, you need more than one. You need the ability to come up with hundreds of ideas. But the most important ingredient you need is you need to have confidence. You need to believe that you actually can make this happen. See, the truth is that when you have that idea and you come running into the office and you tell your employees or your board or your boss, and they tell you it will never work, most of the time they're going to be right. But not always. You've got to believe that this time, this idea is going to be the one that does transform the business. I want to close today by introducing you to one more person. A gentleman named Nolan Bushnell. Now, maybe a few of you know who Nolan Bushnell is, maybe more than know who William Goldman was. And it's because Nolan Bushnell is known as the father of the video game. He was the founder of a company called Atari. But he's also gone on to found maybe 18 or 19 other companies. He's an entrepreneur's entrepreneur. But what he said that's always resonated with me is this. He said, everyone who's ever taken a shower has had an idea. It's the person who gets out of the shower and does something about it that makes a difference. Now, I have sat out where you're sitting more times than you can imagine, and I know how this goes. You're at a conference, and it's stimulating, and you're exchanging ideas, and you have all these great things that you're going to do as soon as you get back to your office. But then you do, and there's a long list of phone calls, there's all the emails you missed, there's all the things that are currently the crisis of the day, and that great idea dies. But let's try something different. Starting now, the next time you have that great idea, and you're sure this is the one that's going to change things, and when you come running downstairs to the kitchen and you tell your spouse, or you come into the office and you tell your employees or your board or your boss this great idea, and they tell you that'll never work, don't let it die there. Do something about it. Towel off. Make the difference. And if everyone is still doubting you, you can always call me because, I like every idea that I hear. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Good luck to all of you. Good work.